Welcome back. If you are just joining us, this is INX Prime Live. Remember, we are on your screens every single Monday to Friday between the hours of 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. Now, the Auditor-General of South Africa this week presented to Parliament the 2022-2023 Consolidated Report on local government audit outcomes. Now, she highlighted that out of the 257 municipalities in the country, only 34 of them actually achieved a clean audit. Now, municipalities have fallen further behind with around 24 billion rands in unauthorized expenditure and just over 7 billion rand in fruitless actually and wasteful expenditure. Now, municipalities are also not spending nearly enough on the delivery of services to communities. And to chat more about this, we are going to be chatting to Stuart Morrison, who is a data analyst on the Governance Insights and Analysis Unit of Good Governance South Africa. He joins me now for his first impressions on what surely is a shocking failure to manage public funds by our leaders. Good evening, Stuart. It's a great honor to have you here on INX Prime Live.
Good evening. Thanks so much for this invite. I think, it's the Auditor General's report is quite an interesting one. And I think it really gives a sobering reality of what a lot of South Africa's municipalities are actually going through. And I think, as you've mentioned, on the one hand, we've seen that only about 34 municipalities have actually gotten a clean audit out of 257, which is, quite shocking. And we've seen that a number of municipalities have actually not moved up into another category, right? So going from from the level below clean audit to clean audit, and so on. And so I think, it really creates gives a good picture. But I think it's also a grounded report, right? Because it doesn't just highlight a lot of the challenges, and there are a lot of challenges, but I think it also highlights a lot of what is actually working. And, so for example, the Auditor-General report actually highlights how the Public Audit Act that was amended in 2019 has actually been working to ensure that the Auditor-General scope is broadened, and that has actually allowed the Auditor-General to hold municipalities accountable. And we're now starting to see the positive impacts of this amendment, coming into fruition. So I think overall, it does provide a very sobering reality, one that is negative in many ways, but there's also some key takeaways that we can also take, which can help us to think about how, the successful and clean audited municipalities are functioning compared to the ones that are struggling.
Yeah, and I think we need to definitely celebrate those 34 municipalities that are, managing and able to actually have a clean audit, because, the large majority of them, like we did mention, failed them dismally. I just want to look at and zoom in on some of the issues and some of the challenges, but also where most of this irresponsible spending actually happens. So the biggest culprits seems to be a loss of money through, like I did mention, irresponsible spending, but also limited maintenance on infrastructure. Now, does this mean our public representatives are simply not up to the task of running our cities, or do you think it's another issue?
So I think it would really just depend on the type of municipality that we're speaking about, both in terms of category. So in local government, our municipalities are broken up across three categories: metropolitan municipalities, district municipalities, and local municipalities. But there's also like deeper nuances. So I think it very much depends on, what kind of issues are most prevalent within those municipalities. So for example, in a rural municipality, you might often find that the issue is more due to a lack of people having access to skilled workers. And so you often find there's high vacancies within key positions within the administrative arm of the municipality. And so it might not necessarily mean it's necessarily the political arm, which is where the elected representatives fall into, but it could more be a capacity issue or, a funding issue or something like that. Whereas, if you think about a municipality that's in like a metropolitan area, for example, we might find that, the issues there is that there might be a kind of like a over politicization of the administrative arm. And in, kind of like political theory, it's, assumed that these two arms of local government stay separated, and the laws try as much as possible to protect against that. But oftentimes, especially in places like urban areas, you might find that due to, let's say, a hung council, There's a lot of political instability, such as, in Johannesburg, and that might mean the priorities of the representatives are actually focused more on maintaining the coalition to try and maintain stability over trying to address the municipal challenges and issues. And so, something like the coalition's bill, which is an amendment bill, which will help ease, a lot of those kind of problems, and will actually put, the coalition stuff aside by, framing out different principles and things like that for, different coalitions to follow, so that they can actually focus and address the pertinent issues, which are the ones that are, being faced in the communities, such as, like you mentioned, infrastructure, poor financial management, and things like that.
Yeah, and I definitely think, legislation is going to consistently change over the next few years because of the change in the political sphere as well. Like we did mention, it's been a majority for many, many years. And now we're starting to look at this GNU and coalition discussions all the time. And things are going to consistently change, and we will see bills coming into play to be able to protect the interests of, your everyday citizens while these changes are definitely taking place. But I want to just go back to, the way that the government is currently run and a lot of the wasted expenditure that we're speaking about. I mean, we start off first with the idea that, people are paid a lot of money to come in to do strategic planning and to analyze performance data or whatever it might be. But then, even when we are looking at non-compliance, for example, like there's also this worrying trend of non-compliance with legislation resulting or relating to strategic planning and performance management and most of the majority of our councils. I just want to know what's your comment on that, because we're wasting money getting people to come in and do it, and then we're still having issues with it throughout the whole process.
Sure. So this is actually, something that we've actually done quite a bit of research into. Is really just looking at, why, as you mentioned, there's this discrepancy, right, between we have this great legislation around, monitoring and evaluation and planning systems for local municipalities, but we actually not seeing them either not comply with it, or they're complying, but we're still not seeing any tangible changes in the community, right? And, one thing that is quite interesting is that, often, you mentioned the role of consultants, which, would come in and, kind of help support these areas where, a municipality might not actually have the capacity to do that. But consultants are, more of like a short-term issue, right? And so, oftentimes they're seen as the full solution instead of just a band-aid while they address, let's say, a staffing problem, right? And so I think, while, consultants are used across local government in many different areas, especially in terms of these type of issues, they really require people who understand the communities intimately. And that is what one of the responsibilities of the municipality is. And so just having consultants limits your ability to do that. So in the short term, it's a viable solution. But unfortunately, the problem is that municipalities are struggling to think of a longer term solution to try and address these issues, because, we find that, oftentimes there is a tendency to plan a lot, but there is no implementation of that planning. And there's also no monitoring and evaluation of the performance of those plans that are being implemented. And so one long-term solution for this is, of course, to address those type of vacancy staffing issues. But I think it also relates to a problem of accountability within the, local government sphere. And, our constitution is very clear that we live in a participatory democracy. And so, it's really about local government actually making more of an effort to try and involve the communities to ensure that there is effective accountability, right? And, one of the recommendations that we support is actually by providing some form of a citizens charter in every municipality, where, the community, citizens, and your municipal representatives come to the table together, and they actually set out a list of, principles and, frameworks which will guide alongside the IDPs, will guide the municipality for the next 5 years. And there can be an annual review of that. And that can actually boost, accountability and citizen participation. And that can help put a lot of pressure to ensure that municipalities are complying with the legislation that we have.
Yeah, without a doubt. I think finding a long-term solution is a very important thing. But also just touching on something you mentioned. I know you spoke about the issue with oversight. Now, I know that the AG report also found that there was very little accounting oversight and not enough internal controls in the management of the public's monies, like you did mention. Does this not vindicate various rate payer associations who have actually held back their taxes?
So I think, there's kind of two sides to this. So the municipality has a legal obligation to provide basic services to citizens, right? But if this mandate is not carried out, there isn't enough justification, at least according to, many different legal experts, to withhold taxes and rates, because, even though it's a form of protest, it can actually undermine the dynamics between the community and the municipality. And so, this is really where the provincial government can actually play a very important role, because they can actually be a key mediator between the communities and between, the municipality itself, to ensure that there's an open line of communication and that there is actually implementation that is actually taking place. And I think, this is, of course, now a big challenge for the provincial government, is how to ensure that they play a more active role. And, the Auditor-General report also highlights how, the role of the provincial government also is important to ensuring the success and, the improvement of municipalities. So I think it's not justified, but I think, it means there's a need for the provincial government to play more of a role.
Yeah, and I don't even think it's just, provincial, obviously, in terms of an immediate implementation plan. I mean, we're also seeing, and I'm just looking at some of the comments coming in from our COGTA minister. I mean, they're also he just mentioned that he, looks at announcing a plan to reveal a turnaround strategy in about 3 weeks. Now, I wanted to know, in your opinion as well, are you confident that the GNU government will actually succeed in solving this issue?
So I think, kind of got two minds of thinking. The first one is that, I think you want to be optimistic. It's a bit difficult to say because the GNU has only been in government, for a couple of months. So, we really can only make, a reasoned analysis after about a year or so, right? Because that's really where we can see the crack showing or not. But I want to sort of remain quite optimistic, because I think, especially if you're having ministers that come from different political parties, you might find that this is their opportunity to prove themselves, right? This is their opportunity to show that they can actually govern, and they can show South African citizens that they take things like local government, which is incredibly important, seriously. But on the other hand, I think, in terms of the GNU, you might find that we are not sure how far from the status quo they might be willing to go, because, coming up, a lot of these challenges will require really creative and innovative solutions. And sometimes, that might put more political pressure and might actually undermine the GNU, as a kind of like a governing body. And so, there might be more slow progress because of, the risk of bringing about too much change might add to the political system. So I think, those are kind of the two views that I have right now. I remain a bit optimistic, but I don't think that we will see quite, quick change, just because of the fact that, there's a lot more political dynamics that are now being to considered. And so I think, there needs to be, the GNU will need to move a bit more carefully than they might have otherwise.
Yeah, we had a lot of political commentators also saying that if you really want to see massive change, you have to see the GNU run for at least 20 or 30 years for us to see massive changes in terms of the policies and procedures in South Africa. But let's just go back to the work that you do. Now, I know in your work at the Good Governance Africa, you have actually offered concrete solutions to boost municipal governance. I wanted to know if the GGA will actually be working with our minister and other stakeholders, such as Salga, to ensure that our cities are properly run? Because we really need civil society and we need organizations to get involved.
Sure. So, I think it's the GGA is a think tank. So we try and influence a lot and advocate for, citizens' rights, and especially around governance. And so we work with different stakeholders, both in government and policymakers, but also with the private sector and as well as, ordinary citizens. And I think, as part of civil society, we do have quite a big responsibility. And, through our programs like the Governance Performance Index, which we release every 2 years, which measures the performance of municipalities, according to their constitutional mandate, we hope to not just inform citizens, but have research that is grounded in, in data-backed, evidence, and that is able to provide concrete solutions that actually work. And that might, help support policymakers as they try and figure out this really complex issue, because it is really complex. And as you say, it requires, a lot of different stakeholders coming together, not just policymakers, but also civil society and also ordinary citizens.
Definitely, Stuart. Before we do let you go, though, we are getting a lot of comments and questions coming in from social media, and a lot of people are blaming the GNU as to why there is some issues in terms of progress in terms of local municipalities. But we also need to understand that, our last local election was actually quite a while ago, and the next one's coming up in the near future. I wanted to know, in your opinion, many of our other municipalities suffer from, like I did mention, from these comments, political instability due to the chaotic nature of coalition politics. How much has this issue actually contributed to the woeful state of our cities? I mean, like you did mention, 34 of them only passed these, in particular. So we definitely want to know what's the future for it.
So, I think when it comes to coalitions, there's no direct link or causal link between, the hung council and, performance. We do see that coalitions or hung councils more specifically tend to have a bit more political instability. And so that will definitely have an impact on, the administrative arm of local government. But, I think in terms of coalitions, they are not a good thing or a bad thing, right? It's really what we are able to make of them. And I think, with South Africa's political system, coalitions have been coming for many years. And so it's just now how we respond to it, because it can either help, pivot local municipalities, it can help support and develop South Africa further, or it can actually bring about further challenges, right? And so I think things like the coalition bill will really help in that element. In terms of the GNU, I think it's a bit too early and to say how it will affect local government, right? Because as you say, it'll take a bit of time for us to really see the impact. And of course, in 2 years, 2026, we'll have the local election. And so I think, what will be quite interesting is really how the coalition bill gets implemented into these hung councils and then the 2026 election. It'll be really interesting to see how these type of dynamics shake up things. But I'm, again, a bit kind of optimistic about, the fact that this is a new thing, relatively new thing in South Africa. And I think it will take a bit of time for politicians to really get used to and into playing with a new set of rules almost. And so, it's a bit frustrating because on the one hand, these things do take time, but oftentimes, people who are without water or electricity cannot wait for 2 years, for these things to be fixed. So it's, kind of like walking a delicate line, but ultimately there is no real causal link between the two to say that this is actually a direct cause of the coalition governments. It can be, but it can also not be.
No, we definitely wish and pray for a better future for all of our local municipalities, without a doubt. But Stuart, thank you so much for joining us this evening on INX Prime Live.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
Awesome, guys. That is Stuart Morrison, who is a data analyst at Good Governance Africa, just sharing with us the important stats that did come out very recently from a report that only 34 out of 257 municipalities actually had a clean audit. It's definitely something that we have to work on, and with the change of the new coalition government and the GNU, we tend to see changes happening, and we are going to wait and to see what could possibly come, and will there be a better future for South Africa? I guess we just have to wait and see. Now, on that note, we are going to take a quick ad break. We'll come right back.